Every revolution starts in the minds of the people. Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today is Wednesday, December 3rd. Top of the evening to all of you. And I wanted to talk about something somewhat related to the last episode. We were talking about Venezuela, and I have been meaning to talk about this particular issue with Venezuela. And our beloved President Trump has given me good reason to bring it up today. So as we know, he's been conducting these extrajudicial murders, in my opinion, of Venezuelan narco terrorists. In other words, they're drug dealers. But the Trump administration has now redefined that crime as terrorism, meaning we can just kill them without a trial. Something that has precedent, like once you call somebody a terrorist, President Obama, if you remember way back in 2011 or 12, he killed many people with drones. There's a terrorist in the area. We're going to drone bomb the area or the building. He bombed some hospitals. He bombed a few weddings, created quite a few terrorists, by the way, because every time we caught one of those lunatics over here who would drive into a crowd of people and jump out with a knife and ask them why they did it, they would say, bombing our fellow Muslims in our home countries. So now, and tagging on to what I said yesterday, of course, libertarians were ridiculed as they usually are for being pedantic and being academic. And this is a violation of the Fifth Amendment. And what's being done to these scary looking terrorists overseas today is going to be done to others in the future. You know, we all said that the definition of terrorism was going to widen. And of course, here we are, right again, as we are about everything. So Trump is yesterday announced he's also considering striking targets on land, and I assume that means in Venezuela. So there's two sides to this. I mean, first of all, these are just egregious violations of the U.S. Constitution, which, yes, does apply to foreigners. It applies to everybody. It describes restraints on the government, no matter who the government is acting against, and especially the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment, because before the government can act, it has to prove that what it's alleging is true. And not only that, that they even have the right person. Okay, that's one of the reasons for the Fifth Amendment, because believe it or not, the government, which is terrible at everything else, is also terrible about even going out and arresting the right person. I mean, they get the right guy most of the time, but very often, and many people have been exonerated later by DNA evidence, even after sentence of death. And less publicized cases where it's, oh, we got the wrong guy. I know a person with a very common name like John Smith, but it's not that name, but it's almost as common. And he was on the no-fly list for over a decade just because they had the wrong John Smith. So these things happen. This is why due process is so important. And one of the things I'll say about this is not like some squishy liberal 20th century fancy about the Bill of Rights, like the one they came up with, Roe versus Wade, or gay marriage, that this is any of the federal government's business. No, this is a principle the U.S. has gone to war over in the past, due process. So if I asked a lot of my audience, well, why was the War of 1812 fought? The first words some of you would say was bankers. And of course, others might say, well, we wanted to seize Canada from the British. And that's all true. But we did have some legitimate grievances. And the one I think that most people remember, maybe the only one most people remember, is the impressment of sailors into the British Navy. British warships would just board an American ship, and grab the sailors and say, these are deserters from our Navy, and off they'd sail with these people, often grabbing Americans by mistake or not really caring who they got, as long as they can impress X amount of people back into the Navy. And I think here's the thing that a lot of people don't know. And if you can go back, I'll post a link to Madison's address to Congress where he asked for the declaration of war. And it wasn't that we didn't want to give back the deserters. That was not the objection. The United States offered to set up some kind of process so we could figure out which American sailors were actually British deserters and which weren't. And the British refused. Just like when the Taliban responded to America, well, send us your proof that Osama bin Laden was behind this, and we'll take him to court. And if he's found guilty, we'll hand him over. And we just refused. So the big empire, whether it's the United States or Great Britain at the time, will always just blow off their own principles. But that was the reason for the declaration of war in 1812, among others, but interfering with trade and other things. But the first one he mentioned was the impressment. And then he went on to say, look, we've tried to work with them so we could give them back their true deserters. So they had no problem, the Americans, giving back deserters. They just wanted to make sure you didn't grab Americans along with them by mistake. You follow me? And this is why everywhere you go, you get this retarded retort from narco terrorists don't deserve due process. Okay, Einstein. Well, how do you know they are a narco terrorist? How do you know you've even got the right boat? It's not the same make and model as some other boat that really does have narco terrorists. By the way, drug dealers selling drugs to willing American buyers are not terrorists. Okay? All these drugs should be legal anyway. And the only reason that they have fentanyl, which is exceptionally lethal, is because as the war on drugs has progressed and it's gotten harder and harder to smuggle drugs, they've had to put more wallop into something that could be hidden on one's person or whatever. So per square inch of space the stuff takes up, it's got to be stronger and stronger because of the war on drugs. So that's the reason we're even at fentanyl instead of the opium dens, which cocaine and everything else was legal a little over 100 years ago. So this is a very new thing. It's a progressive thing, the war on drugs. It's maternal. It's the nanny state. And the ultimate act of the nanny state puts mothers against drunk driving to shame. This idea that we're going to go out and kill people to save you from your own choices. That's what an infant you are, America, supposedly free American. I mean, how can you defend democracy, which actually I don't, but even a democratic republic, if you have to kill other people to protect the supposed self-governing people from themselves? It's just absurd. We've reached a point in America where it's almost irredeemable. But I digress. Let me give you another example. So the War of 1812, a war fought over due process and other reasons. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So the northern states nullifying that Fugitive Slave Act was the direct reason cited by the Confederate States for seceding from the Union. Okay? And here's the thing. While this was done by abolitionists and people who wanted slavery abolished, they didn't nullify the law based on the idea that returning the slaves to their masters, escaped slaves, was unconstitutional. They acknowledged that the Constitution mandated that those slaves be returned to their masters. Don't kill the messenger, but that's what it said. What they objected to was slave catchers coming into their state and just grabbing black men. Hey, there's one. Let's grab them. No process, no due process, no formal adversarial process to ensure that the person they have is a number one, John Smith. Is this John Smith? Is it the right John Smith? And did John Smith really escape from slavery, a slave relationship? Okay. So, number one, there has to be a process. Number two, that process has to be adversarial. Somebody must be representing the accused. I mean, this isn't like some academic point. This is one of the foundations of American liberty. What makes America any different than any other country? Now, other countries, of course, have copied us on this. And America was once the inspiration of the free world, of every foreigner who yearned for liberty. And rightly so, because we have the best system. But look at it now. I mean, I wrote an article about this and I'll post a link to it in the show notes. But from being that beacon of liberty that Tocqueville came over to write about, and so many countries tried to copy, none completely doing it as well as the United States did. Look at us now. We're like a drunk on the world stage, stumbling around, yelling accusations at everybody, slurring some mumbled phrase about democracy, and beating up on weakling nations that have no possibility of defending themselves. That's the United States of the 21st century. And the rest of the world is just sitting around waiting for it to pass out so it can rid itself of this menace. And all of this stuff about China, by the way, China's threatening nobody. They're making deals. All the threats are coming from Washington, D.C., against everybody, against China, against Russia, against Venezuela now, Iran. I mean, the United States walks around the world accusing everybody of all the crimes it commits itself, which none of them are committing. No one else is invading any other countries. Okay. Yes, Russia did finally, after 20 years of the United States badgering them to try and throw the first, they finally threw the first punch. While the United States had their finger in their nose for 20 years while Putin was president. So that's another thing that American presidents are good at, by the way. I'll write a separate article about this, but every war in American history, the United States has got the other side to throw the first punch. Going back, not the Revolutionary War, of course. That was the one that was justified. War of 1812, you could make arguments either way, but certainly after that, the Mexican-American War, we tried to buy all that land from Mexico, and then when they wouldn't sell it to us, we sent troops into a disputed area knowing that they would respond. And then we declared war on them and stole all their land. That was the first example. And of course, what Lincoln did was to goad the Confederates into throwing the first punch. In fact, he talked about that being necessary so that his administration would seem like the good guys. Long before he made any pretense of freeing the slaves with the war, he just said, no, you pay your taxes and you respect federal land and no one's going to get invaded. So, of course, Wilson did it with the Germans kind of by omission. So it's really an interesting part of history that Wilson, at that time, before World War I, the government didn't control arms sales to other countries. If you were an arms manufacturer, you were a private company, sell to whoever you want. There's just more freedom back then. Now, the government did reserve the right to ban you selling to the enemy. So the United States had proclaimed its neutrality. No country on earth was the enemy. And Wilson allowed them to sell arms to the Allies. And then they made the excuse that they couldn't sell them to the Germans because of the blockade. So basically, the U.S. very knowingly supplied the Allies, and then the Germans started sinking the ships that all the bombs were on, like the Lusitania, actually a British ship, but, the unrestricted submarine warfare. So he kind of by omission, or he could have stepped in and said, no sales to the Allies unless you sell to the other powers as well. Had that power, didn't use it on purpose to goad the Germans into the war, into attacking American shipping. And then finally, of course, we know FDR just badgered the Japanese into attacking Pearl Harbor once he cut off their oil. I mean, they really had no other choice. Probably did have another choice, but it wasn't a good one. Attacking Pearl Harbor turned out to be a very bad one for them. But yeah, American presidents are very good at getting the other side to throw the first punch and then saying, oh my God, we're the victim. They're the aggressors. But we're not even trying to do that with Venezuela. I mean, we're not even accusing them of shooting at anybody, stabbing anybody, not even of terrorism in any conventional sense, which is violence against civilians for a political purpose. That's what terrorism is defined as, okay? These are drug dealers. And there's pretty good evidence that the boats they're blowing up don't even have drugs that are going to end up here anyway. But even if they did, even if they were driving them right into New York Harbor, no, you can't just extrajudicially murder people. It's absurd. And conservatives are never going to be able to say the word Constitution again if they support this, but they are supporting it. So Rand Paul tweeted out, hey, I got a letter from the Coast Guard that says that 21% of the boats we board that we suspect of being drug traffickers actually turn out not to be. 1 out of 5. Okay. The United States has already blown up 21 boats. They've killed 83 people. So there's no reason to believe that as many as 5 of them were just people in boats on innocent people, or on innocent people on boats that weren't carrying drugs. So Rand Paul tweets out this letter from the Coast Guard, and some retard congressman retweets it saying, oh, what a revelation. 80% of these have drugs. Okay. So what are you saying? You're saying you're okay with blowing up 5 boats with drugs on them and 1 or 4 boats with drugs on them and 1 without drugs? Yeah, that's okay with you? Like if we do this 1,000 times, you're okay with blowing up 200 boats full of innocent people? I mean, what do you even say? The thing that is very evident is that the United States sold its soul during the war on terror. It's gone. If we're going to stand for this, really, we're not even as good as the socialist countries in Europe. I mean, we're way below them. I mean, what separates us from a third world country? They use machetes over in Africa to kill each other. We use Hellfire missiles to kill people. What's the difference? There's no justice behind it. There's no presumption of innocence. There's no suspicion of the government. There's complete worship of the dear leader. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, and everybody ought to be ashamed of this. And they should be calling for it to stop immediately. And Trump used to have the great line during his campaign, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country anymore. Well, if you don't have due process, you don't have America anymore. Okay? Remember the Kavanaugh trials when all the conservatives were screaming that he was being convicted without a trial, that there's no due process? Okay? Nobody killed him, right? Nobody drone bombed him. It's disgraceful, it's embarrassing, and it's un-American. And it has to stop.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.